So on behalf of my colleagues on the board, we've asked you back in order to enlighten us a little further about the ethical aspects of issues that we as a company face. Please begin when you're ready.
Good morning, my name is Mackenzie, and this is Emily and Jasenia. Thank you for inviting us back today to discuss the ethical dimensions surrounding our decision here at Google to fire James Damore after the release of his memo entitled Google's Ideological Echo Chamber. The memo asserted that the fundamental biological differences between men and women were to blame for the lack of representation of females in Google, as well as the technology workforce in general. The memo was a product of our unique corporate culture, which emphasizes open discourse. However, in the midst of a climate where we here at Google are facing lawsuits relating to underpay of our female employees and unfair treatment, the tensions from this memo, released from this memo, could be felt through Google internally as well as externally throughout society. We at Google are focused on building a Google for everyone, and this memo really set us back in this area. As you know, we are a company that values diversity of thought and open discourse. However, we are also a company that values respect, creativity, and inclusion amongst all of our employees. Inclusion amongst all of our employees. We, here at Google, we are facing the backlash of these tensions and this memo, and our ethical analysis will further prove why our decision to fire James Damore was the right decision to make. And Emily will now take you through that.
Thank you, Kenzie. So when this memo was first released, Google was tasked with acting swiftly in response. We could either retain James Damore with the option of disciplinary action or provide an avenue for training, or we could fire James Damore. Through our ethical analysis, we hope to show you that the firing of James Damore was the correct ethical decision. When we conducted our ethical analysis, we wanted to carve out who our three main stakeholders would be. And we landed on us here at Google as a company, our employees here at Google, as well as James Damore himself as his own separate entity. To provide you with a little framework on how we conducted our analysis, we decided to choose 4 distinct ethical areas that would give us a more well-rounded picture of the entire issue. Those 4 areas are interests, rights, duties, and character. The area of interest focused mostly on outcome, and that is to maximize the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. The area of rights focuses in on what our most important entitlements are. The area of duties focuses on obligations to one another and is relationship-based. And lastly, the area of character focuses on the most ethical decision being one that focuses on who each of our stakeholder wants to be and the character traits that they want to emulate. So we can start with the area of interest. Starting with us here at Google, our main interest is to have a productive workforce, one which affects our bottom line. The interest of our employees here at Google is to have a safe work environment that they feel free to participate in. And the interest of James Damore is to participate in a culture of open discourse that we here at Google encourage and promote. So when we look at all 3 of the interests of our stakeholders and how it relates to the decision to retain or fire Damore, we can start with Damore's interest to participate in this culture of open discourse in which he released his memo in. Although this gives us a reason to retain him, the interest of Google to have a productive workforce and the interest of our employees to have a safe work environment override his interest. Next, we can move on to the area of rights. Rights, as you remember, focuses on our most important entitlements. The rights of us here at Google are to provide a safe work environment for our employees. The rights of our employees are to participate in that safe work environment, and the rights of James Damore are to critique his management freely. So focusing back on James Damore's right to critique his management freely, that could give us a reason here at Google to retain him as an employee. However, our rights at Google and the rights of our employees are more important to consider. Thus, it is the most ethical decision to fire James Damore. So far, we've covered interests and we've covered rights. Now we'll move on to duties, which focuses mostly on our obligations to one another and the obligations of our stakeholders. Us here at Google, we have an obligation to provide that safe work environment for our employees. and our employees have an obligation to perform their job effectively. Lastly, James Damore has an obligation to treat his fellow coworkers with dignity and respect. When we look at all three of the avenues, all three of our stakeholders, they all point to firing James Damore. Damore did not perform his obligation to treat his fellow coworkers with courtesy and respect by releasing this memo. Because of the damaging words within the memo, our employees were not able to perform their job effectively with his presence. And lastly, us here at Google, our obligation to promote a safe work environment was damaged by the words of this memo, and us retaining him would greatly affect that. Next, we can move on to character. So far we've covered interest, we've covered rights, and we've covered duties. Character focuses in on who we want to be at Google, and here at Google we promote a culture of diversity, inclusivity, and innovation. Keeping that in mind, we also want to act justly and fairly on behalf of our employees. But it's also important for us to remember that James Damore acted courageously by releasing this memo under this culture of open discourse, one in which we encourage. However, the contents of his memo were so damaging that it does not follow who at Google we want to be, a culture of innovation, creativity, and mostly diversity. Thus, it is the correct ethical decision to fire James Damore under the area of character. So when we look at the bigger picture, character, rights, duties, and interests, all four areas point to the most ethical decision being to fire James Damore. With that, I will hand it off to Jasenia, who will give us some recommendations moving forward.
Thank you, Emily, for that detailed ethical overview. As one of the most renowned and innovative STEM companies in the entire world, actionable insights are pertinent to our success. As internal consultants, we have developed and proposed the following recommendations in order to better help manage situations like these should they occur in the future. These recommendations include the implementation of a Google Star system, an enhanced onboarding and training process, and the implementation of the Googler +1 mentoring program. The Google Star system would be a reward system to encourage meaningful contributions to our discussion board at Google, and then reward those employees who engage in respectful discussion on the board. These rewards could include anything such as extra innovation days or trips to other Google campuses. Next, an enhanced onboarding process. There are certain online interactive training tools that we have to offer to our employees as a result of legal reasons. We find that those employees retain that knowledge better throughout their time at Google, and we would go ahead and include our diversity and inclusion topics with that, and that's something that we could even have them retest and be recertified every 6 months or a year in order to stay compliant as an employee at Google. Lastly, the implementation of the Googler +1 mentoring program. We already have basic mentoring programs, but this would take it one step further. What we would do is pair a senior Google employee who's well-versed and immersed in Google culture and represents our values very well with a new hire in order to help their transition in the onboarding process. We would select candidates from diverse backgrounds in order to really allow and foster a diverse and fulfilling partnership. These recommendations would contribute to our internal culture and environment. Next, we would also encourage the investment of additional funding and increased funding for education programs and current programs that focus on girls and women in STEM. These contributions would focus on our external duties to our communities and society at large. With that said, we have done thorough research and are certain that these tools will help sustain a strong, inclusive culture at Google. As you know, we want every decision that we make at Google to support our vision of inclusivity. Anything that could harm the productivity of even just one employee is harmful to Google as a whole overall. This is why we are willing to make these decisions now. Every decision that we make today sets a precedent for who we are and allows us and puts us one step further to the best Google that we can be. Thank you.